So why do some agents reject a book after reading, say, the first paragraph or two? And why do some readers DNF a book after only reading the first page or two? Well, there can be a lot of reasons, but I'll tell you one strong reason right now. It might be because you don't sound like anybody. If your writing comes off as robotic or mechanical, or just like you're fulfilling a duty to the page rather than really enjoying being there, that's a clear sign to the reader that they're not interacting with a human. It feels like they're just reading AI. The goal of this video is to help you write a single paragraph, just say 3 to 5 sentences where you sound fully like yourself or like the character that you're writing. So let me take you through these 9 steps, and by the end, I guarantee you're going to be able to write a couple of sentences that feel very alive. Now, the first step in trying to find your voice as an author is to erase all expectations. I find that a lot of authors come to the table bringing a lot of baggage that they've been saddled with by elementary school teachers and high school English teachers, and just all these voices in their head telling them you can't do this, you can't do that. You have to get rid of those if you're going to capture a true and authentic voice on the page. I'm talking about things like, am I allowed to have fragments? Yes, of course you can. I would say most best-selling authors use fragments. Questions like, can I start with a conjunction? The rule against conjunctions came from some fiddly-faddly idiot 300 years ago that decided, oh, you can't start with a conjunction. That's a rubbish rule. Or questions like, can you misspell words? Or can you make up words? And the answer is yes. And yes, you can get away with anything as long as you can pull it off on the page. Or a question like, do I have to use respectable language? No, you most certainly do not. All you are required to do is to be true to yourself or to the character whose voice you're trying to emulate. There is one and only one rule when trying to find your voice on the page. It's to trust your quirkiness. Let yourself speak and flow out and just transfer that energy onto the page. Now, the second step in finding your voice is a very important one, and it is know what voice is. So let's look at 2 examples. One's going to be a little bit more robotic and mechanical, just going through the motions, and the other one's going to be filled with voice. A first line could be, Sarah was tired as she drove to work on a Monday. Contrast that with a line like, another Monday, another caffeine emergency. You see how the second one has a lot more verve, a lot more energy, a lot more personality. It just feels fresher. Now, the second line could be, on her way, she stopped at the coffee shop and it was a mess. Compare that to something like, Sarah shuffled into been there, done that. Whoever named this place deserved both a raise and a stern talking to, and nearly turned right back around. So we have a much more active verb, we have shuffled, we have specificity in what the coffee shop was called, and what's more, it's sort of a clever pun, so you might get a smile out of a reader from that. And then we also have a parenthetical, like, whoever named this place deserved both a raise and a stern talking to, so like both at the same time. She hates it and she loves it. And the third line could be something like, the line was so long, she worried that she might not have the time, as opposed to something like, the line snaked through the shop like a line to get into a funeral, slow moving and full of people who'd rather be anywhere else. I think that second example is a lot more clever. It also includes a simile, which I think elevates the sentence, and we also get a little bit of sentence variety. It feels different than the 2 previous sentences. So work on continually improving your ability to recognize voice on the page, and a great way to do that is read a lot of books with very strong voice to them and allow that sort of seep into your unconscious. You're going to get better just through reading those voices and making your voice come out on the page. Now, the third step in finding your voice is the absolute unskippable one, the one that if you take out, the whole process will fall apart. It's number 3, discover your natural voice. What I want you to do is to take out your phone and simply record yourself speaking. And take one of these prompts and just talk about it for a minute or 2. Use this prompt, I'll tell you what doesn't make any sense, and choose a hobby horse and go on a little rant. Or use this prompt, I remember when you could, and talk about whatever. Now, after you make that recording of yourself, play it back, and I want you to focus on, how do you sound? Do you just have a whole rush of sentences smashed into each other? Kind of like the way I talk, if you can't tell. People remind me constantly in the comments I talk too fast. I'm sorry. Or do you have a more deliberate, thoughtful, measured pace with your sentences and how you speak? How you sound when speaking is the best clue for how you should sound on the page when you're writing. How you speak is very much your natural way of communicating, your natural way of using language, and you want to capture that energy and replicate it on the page. And honestly, a really good technique would be not just to listen back to it, but to actually transcribe it. so you can see this is the way that your verbal speech, this is how it actually appear on a page. And just so you know, I'm not making this up. I actually did this with students. I taught college for more than a decade at schools like USC and Chapman University, and I would take them through a process where I had them listen to themselves and then match that with what's happening on the page and make sure that those two things matched. Because if they didn't, there was a problem. Like they were faking it on the page. They weren't being themselves on the page. Now, some of you might have the question, do I have to sound like myself? And I mean, the answer is no. Like if you have a Russian character, you're going to try to channel sort of a Russian accent when that character speaks. So yes, it's perfectly fine to adapt a persona because you have multiple characters in your book. But I think it's absolutely essential that you know what you naturally sound like. And listen, if you want a little bit more help on your voice, and specifically sentences, you should take my course, How to Write a Splendid Sentence. Other than my novel course, it is actually my most popular course. People absolutely love it. I give little quizzes at the end of each video. There's little PDFs so you can read along with the sentences that I'm talking about. And I even give writing challenges at the end of every single video. And I cover stuff like the 4 pillars of sentence writing, which is order, focus, pace, and vary. And the most fun part of the course is the breaking the rules section. Because, I mean, we don't want to be rule followers as writers, so I teach you both the rules and then also how to break them well. The 4th step in really developing a good authorial voice on the page is to describe your voice. I think it's really helpful to sort of pin down what exactly you sound like on the page by just coming up with, say, 3 descriptors, like 3 adjectives that describe how you sound when you're writing. And if you sound vastly different between books, then just choose descriptors for the book that you're working on right now. And to give us a sense of how this would work, let's look at 2 examples. The first one's going to be Forrest Gump by Winston Groom. Now, when you read this little paragraph, you can hear the way that Tom Hanks would say it in the movie, can't you? But it's coming through the page. The misspelling, the syntax, the sentence structure, it's all there. So if we were to use some words to describe this, we'd probably choose words like colloquial or folksy or down to earth. And what it certainly is unique, right? This is a voice that doesn't sound like anybody else's voice. He's immediately captured a persona on the page. For a second example, let's look at The Devil Wears Prada by Laura Weisberger. Now, take a second and read this paragraph and then try to come up with 3 words that you would use to describe the tone in this paragraph. You can pause the video if you need a little bit more time. How I would describe it as energy, right? It's very, very energetic. I describe it as stream of consciousness, like it's really flowing. And then I'd also describe it, there are certain sections that appear kind of staccato, which I think is a fun little addition to the voice here. That clutch gas shift part is very staccato. So now that you've come up with 3 words to describe how specifically you sound on the page, please leave them in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think your voice sounds like. Now, once you know your 3 descriptor words, it's now time to, number 5, check them against the character. Now, you're going to be creating a large variety of characters, right? And for this particular book, you have to determine, all right, to what extent does my particular voice match the voice of the character I'm trying to create? Some of the time, those will be very, very close to one another, especially if the character maybe is based on autobiographical details of yourself. Other times, it's going to be worlds apart. The other thing you have to pay attention to is point of view. If you're writing in first person, then yes, you're going to really have to channel that character's voice in this particular book. However, if you're writing omniscient, then you can really let your voice flow through the omniscient narrator's voice and then change to the character's voice when you're writing something in their dialogue. And lastly, I just want to talk about the process of how to create a character. A lot of authors think, oh, I need to come up with their hair color and eye color and height first, like basic information about that character. And instead, I would encourage you to go in a different direction. Start with voice. Come up with a single line that character would say that somehow encapsulates their personality perfectly. Once you get that line, and you can hear how they speak in your head, then you're ready to move on to all the stuff about their background and what they look like and all that other jazz. But hearing them might be the first step in character creation. Now, the next step when trying to create a voice on the page is number 6, choose a tone. What sort of attitude do you want to be on the page? What sort of attitude is the reader going to get from reading your words? Now, it could be something like very calm or very serious, right? It doesn't have to be anything wild, but I think you have a lot of other options as well. You could be sarcastic, You could be depressed. You could be nonchalant. I think having an attitude in mind when you're writing a particular passage allows you to do so much naturally, subconsciously, stuff like word choice, stuff like sentence pacing. So much will just come through if you're thinking, all right, I'm gonna try to sound like this right now. And just for a couple of examples, think about Kurt Vonnegut and Slaughterhouse-Five. What a cynical, world-weary voice that is on the page. So it goes. And there's also a lot of dark humor in that book as well. Or think of the hilarious side-poking humor of Douglas Adams or a Terry Pratchett. You can tell in almost every single paragraph of their book, they are thinking as an author, what would make this section funny? And that overriding desire to make jokes and to crack jokes ends up influencing every single word that they write. The next step is one that a lot of authors forget, and it honestly handicaps their prose. It is number 7, focus on rhythms. Let's go back to that text that we were looking at before from The Devil Wears Prada. I want to point out that the first sentence of that book contains 35 words and 0 commas, while the next sentence contains 4 commas in 5 words. The rhythms of those 2 sentences could not be more different. One is flowing uninterruptedly, the other one is very staccato and jerky. So when you're creating rhythms in your prose, you want to vary it up between sentences. Have the rhythms of one sentence contrast with a sentence before it and with a sentence after it. And another great way to create a voice on the page is making sure you're varying your sentence lengths. That very first sentence of The Devil Wears Prada is 35 words. The very last sentence is just 6 words. Now, you might think that the Forrest Gump example breaks my rule, because you eyeball it and you're like, you know, all 4 of those sentences are roughly the same length, John. How does that make a pleasing rhythm on the page? Okay, I'll tell you how. It's not just about sentence lengths, it's also how you break up each sentence internally. The first sentence of the Forrest Gump example is 2 parts. The next one is 3 parts, but all 3 parts are really, really short. The next sentence is also 3 parts, but all 3 parts are much longer. And then the last sentence is broken up into 4 separate parts. Yes, the way you break up your sentences and the length of your sentences goes a long way to how your voice sounds on the page. So you absolutely have to pay attention to that. But I will say, don't try to pay attention to that as you're in the process of flowing and writing. It's more of an unconscious thing. If you allow your natural speaking self to go onto the page, that's going to happen without you even thinking about it. Yes, you'll make some tweaks later on, but you can do most of the tweaks in revision rather than in the drafting process. For the 8th step of this voice finding process I'm taking you through, we're going to look at deliberate word choice. Word choice is so essential in voice. You can sound very pretentious if you're using very highfalutin words, but say the exact same thing in 2nd grader language, and suddenly you seem very accessible. Now it's time for a quiz. I'm going to show you an example from Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead, and you're going to tell me what word you think she picked. So the sentence is, the company put the kibosh on any choice other than going into the mines. Now, the word in question is kibosh. Did she use that? The company put the chokehold, or the company put the shut hole, or the company put the clamp down. Each of these options are viable, but each one of them is a very distinctly different choice for how the text sounds on the page. And I should also say that the word that Barbara Kingsolver chose might not be the right word for you if you were trying to write the same sentence. This is just her voice on the page. Okay, do you have your guesses in? A, B, C, or D? Well, I can tell you that she doesn't choose the first option, kibosh, maybe because it's too Yiddish for a story set in the Appalachian Mountains. She also does not choose number 2. I think there's nothing wrong with that word. Perhaps that word choice maybe was a little bit too expected though, and she wanted to do something a little bit different. And lastly, she doesn't choose number 4. That was probably the most awkward sounding of them all. I didn't jive with it, and neither did she. No, she chose number 3, which I think is a very interesting choice because 1, it's a made up word. Like, shut hole is not actually a word. And I chose that because I want to make sure that you know you have the freedom to make up words. Like, you're a writer. You have the whole writer card that gives you the permission to make up words if it is the right word for your sentence. I also think it's kind of an appropriate word because it's literally talking about something that's going on in the sentence. I mean, a mine is basically a hole that people go into, and so shut hole is very symbolic for what's happening to their other options. The only hole that is open is going into the mind. But at the same time, I find this word very accessible. It's very Anglo-Saxon. It's not difficult to understand. Anybody whose first language is English will be able to figure out the meaning of this word. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying like you need to make up a whole bunch of words. I'm just pointing out the process by which you go through, maybe more in revision than in drafting, of how you choose the exact right word for your sentence to capture the voice that you're trying to create on the page. And for our very last step in this entire process, it is number 9, read it out loud. You need to take a paragraph that you've written, maybe yesterday or a year ago, and read it out loud to yourself. Now, the reason that this is the last step in the process is that your ear is smarter than your eye. Your eye, seeing something on the page, often struggles to detect whether there's a lot of voice in it or how it would actually sound if spoken out loud. Your ear, on the other hand, is an absolute genius. It can really tell what you were trying to do and whether you've accomplished your goal of actually creating a voice on the page. Now, how do you know if a passage doesn't have any voice to it? Well, in this case, I would refer you to Elmore Leonard's famous rule of, if it sounds like writing, rewrite it. Often things that sound like writing are just a little bit too stiff and maybe a little bit too proper to have a strong voice on the page. Okay, I hope that helps you come up with a strong voice for yourself on the page or come up with a strong voice for your character on the page, and good luck with your writing.